Welcome. The Cat in the Hat is back again, and they're going to be talking about Mecanum Wheels. If you've got questions, please enter them in the Twitch tab. Take it away.
Hi, we're team 10273. The Cat in the Hat comes back. I'm Grayson, and I'll be presenting with Matt. Here's our contact information. If you need it, you can take a picture of that or write it down. It will be on the last slide as well if you miss it. And here we go.
Okay, so what we're going to cover in this presentation, we'll talk about what Mecanum wheels are, why you would want to use them, how to use them, what different types of Mecanum wheels are available, and getting started actually using them.
So what is Mecanum? So Mecanum wheels are the wheels you can see on the screen. They have rollers around the outside that are tipped at a 90-degree angle. These wheels are called a holonomic drive, meaning they allow movement in every direction, and soon you'll see why they can.
Okay, so the way that a Mecanum wheel works is with the rollers angled at a 45-degree angle. It basically, when you rotate the wheel, each individual wheel wants to move at an angle instead of just straight forward or back. So the way that you translate that into your drivetrain to go straight forward, for example, you can see on the pictures there, with the wheels going forward, they'll actually go at an angle towards each other, and then that angle actually cancels out, so then it ends up just going straight. Similar with like strafing, it would just be the left and the right. Instead of forward and back, they're going left and right towards each other. The angles get canceled out again, so then your net direction is just to the side. Turning, rotating your robot, it's just like a normal drivetrain. So one side forward and the other side backwards, and that'll rotate it.
So how to program Mecanum. So Mecanum wheels are a little more difficult to program than a normal drive, but once you know how, it's pretty straightforward. So the steps for programming the Mecanum wheels are compute the forward speed and then compute the strafe speed. And then you can also compute the rotate speed. Since you control it with a controller, the joystick output on said controller is it can give you that speed that you need. So you can just take the output from that possibly. But once you have all of these speeds, you'll want to add them up for each wheel. There's specific equations here. I'll go through them real quick. So for the front left wheel's speed, you'll want forward power plus right strafe power plus clockwise power. From the input, then the front right would be the input for the forward minus right strafe minus clockwise. Back left equals forward minus right strafe plus clockwise. And back right equals forward plus right strafe minus clockwise. And if the power for a wheel exceeds 100%, you'll need to scale the power. For example, if you are just using the joystick inputs and you get a lower value than 100%, you'll want to scale that up so that your wheels will not be exceeding 100%, but also won't be at a terribly slow scale.
Okay, so advantages to using Mecanum wheels. It allows you to strafe side to side. You can easily maneuver around the field to pick up game elements, or also makes defense easier. or maneuvering around other robots. So that all fits into, like, you have better agility, you can move around the field faster. You can still turn, you can actually turn better than with a 4-wheel drive or a 6-wheel tank drive because with the rollers on there, the wheels actually slip more, so there's less resistance when you're trying to do, like, say, a 360 or something. Also, there's a lot to learn. You can learn a lot more about the mechanics behind the Mecanum wheels, also programming. There's a lot there to learn too. So.
The disadvantages to Mecanum wheels, they do have less traction, which means other teams can push you easier, and you can't push as hard against others, which is mostly defense related if you're playing defense or a team is pushing you to play defense. But it is also slipperier on a ramp. So depending on the game for a certain year, it could make it harder to navigate. Mecanum wheels also make it more difficult to sense distance accurately because the rollers slip while you're moving, so the rotations of the wheel don't equal distance moved. Though you can bypass that and get an accurate distance using odometry wheels, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Mecanum wheels are also slightly more difficult to program and can't go over obstacles as easily. Plus, you'll need a balanced weight across all 4 wheels.
Okay, so odometry wheels, it's basically another way to sense your distance and angle just to get your exact position on the field. Because of how much the Mecanum wheels slip, odometry wheels can help a lot with getting the accurate measurements that you otherwise wouldn't have. You can also make your autonomous programs run much faster and more consistent. This is kind of more advanced, so we're not going to go too deep into this. We could actually do a completely separate presentation on these, so we're just going to leave it at that for now.
So how to mount and use Mecanum wheels? You can either do a direct drive or a chain drive. So with the direct drive, you have the wheel mounted directly to the motor shaft, but the motor gearbox takes all of the weight and abuse of driving, and that can shorten the life of your motors, and it'll just be bad for the motors in general. So better than a direct drive, even though it takes a little more work to set up, is a chain or a gear drive where the wheel is on a separate axle which has bearings to support it. Then you can put a chain or belt from the motor to the wheel. It is much more sturdy and keeps most of the stress off of the motor. And since you're using either a gear or a chain, you can gear up and down the speed instead of having to swap out different motors for different speeds.
Okay, so one of the things you need to be really careful about with Mecanum wheels is to make sure you have them mounted right. You want it so that each roller, when they line up across your robot, it needs to form an X from the top of the robot. When you're looking at the bottom, it's actually going to be the opposite. It's going to form an O. So the left and right labels on each wheel don't go with the side of the robot. It has to do with the direction that the rollers are slanted. So that's just something to watch out for. We learned that the hard way.
Now we will get into some of the different types of Mecanum wheels you can get. There are many different styles and brands and designs, and we'll take you through the ones that we recommend for most situations. So these are the AndyMark standard Mecanum wheel. They use bushings for rotation. They're mostly plastic parts and have low strength. They're rated for 50 pounds on a set of 4, but they are $77 for a set of 4 without being very strong, and the bushings aren't super smooth. So we do not recommend these.
Okay. AndyMark HD Mecanum wheel. They have bushings inside the rollers. They're higher strength because they have the 2 plates. That makes them able to withstand a lot more weight, 200 pounds per wheel. They are a lot more expensive at $225 for a set of 4. You can get them into multiple sizes. 4-inch is usually a good size for FTC robots. These are pretty solid wheels and they will work, but because they use the bushings in the rollers, they don't roll as smoothly as some wheels. So that can lead to draining your battery faster or not being able to reach as higher of speeds, especially when you're strafing.
So these are the Rev Mecanum wheels. They use bearings for rollers, which is smoother, and it's $90 for a set of 4. They have a smaller diameter, which gives you more space for other things, though it also requires lower gear ratio motors if you want the same speed, since they are smaller.
Okay, the Vex Mecanum wheels, it's similar to like the first wheel we showed with the split roller design. Makes it not as strong, not as sturdy. And if you use these, you'll want to use like a 3D printed adapter so that you can use a more standard motor shaft as your axle instead of having to use the square 1/4 inch shaft. They are fairly cheap at $65 for a set of 4. You can get them in multiple sizes. We wouldn't really recommend this except for really lightweight robots. Again, that's because of the split roller design. It doesn't have the 2 plates on each side, so it can't support a whole lot of weight.
The Nexus Mecanum wheels, these have ball bearing rollers. They're rated for 33 pounds a wheel, which your robot is not going to exceed. They're mounted using a good hole spacing, almost 2 inches. So you have to use a Nexus hub or a converter or 3D print a converter. They're $120 for a set of 4, but we do recommend these because of the bearings and they're sturdy.
And the GoBilda wheels, these are actually the wheels that we prefer. They have ball bearings in the rollers like the Nexus wheels. They're actually pretty much the same. They really are the same wheel as the Nexus. The only difference is inside the hub. It's designed differently. It makes it a lot easier to connect and attach with standard FTC parts. You don't have to do as many like converters to get them back to whatever shaft or axle you're using. Also, if you don't like the yellow rollers, you can purchase white, just plain white rollers, and you can dye them whatever color you want. Last year we made ours black and they held up really well all season. The price, it's a pretty good price, $105 for a set of 4. And like I said, these are our preferred wheels, so we would definitely recommend these. We find that they work really well, and especially just all around good performance, solid wheel, and the bearings roll really smoothly, so you don't drain your battery very fast.
The last choice is 3D printed or custom Mecanum wheels. There's designs available on Thingiverse, and you can design your own, but it's tricky to get the right curve on the rollers. For relic recovery, we 3D printed the Mecanum wheels for our intake on this in that picture. We did break some arms though, so we used them for our intake so that they could draw blocks in and bring the blocks up. But 3D printing Mecanum wheels for a drivetrain isn't really recommended because they're a lot weaker than the other choices. But that is a choice if you need it for an intake or another mechanism on your robot.
So we have a few tips and tricks for Mecanum wheels. If your robot won't drive straight, this would also apply to strafing. You want to check to make sure your weight is centered on all 4 wheels. One of the ways we did this was to put like the front 2 wheels on a scale and then lift up the back on some blocks so that it stays level and measure that weight, and then turn it around and try it on the back, and then do the same thing left and right just to see if the weight is kind of even over all 4 directions. Another thing you can do is check to make sure all 4 wheels have an equal amount of friction. So that could be making sure the chains are tensioned equally. Could also be just checking to make sure all the rollers on each wheel roll smoothly. Sometimes one of them will be stiff and that can cause problems. Another thing is if your robot doesn't go in the right direction, just check to make sure your wheels are mounted correctly. Again, it should be an X from the top. And if you're looking at it from below, it'll be an O. That's just a really easy thing to check before you start changing anything in the code or messing up stuff that might not have been a problem in the first place. If your robot's really slow, you might want to check how heavy your robot is. If you could maybe lighten it up somewhat. We did a test last year and found that I think the amount of, we did like 15 pounds of weight difference changed our speed by about 20%. So that can have a big impact. Also, you could check your gear ratio. If you have too high of a gear ratio, it could slow your robot down. If you have too much torque, then you're going unnecessarily slow. But at the same time, if you don't have enough torque, you could be putting extra force on that motor, making it work extra hard and slowing it down in that way too. So just a few things to check before start changing other things.
Yeah. And another tip for programming, I didn't mention this before, but when you are programming and it's great to use the 2 sticks on the robot, on the controller, 2 joysticks for controlling it. Our team uses 1 joystick to go, you push it up and down to go back and forward. Then you can use side-to-side motion to move the robot side to side, and then use the other joystick to turn. So I know that other teams have 1 joystick to go back and forth, but side to side doesn't stray, it turns. So they basically have a 1-stick drive, and then the other stick is just for strafing. So those are the 2 main ways people control a Mecanum wheel drive. So you'll have to play with what feels better for your team.
Okay, so we will be hosting a robot in 2 weeks. It'll be virtual. It'll be on September 26th. If anybody wants to, any teams want to join us, each team will run about 3 to 4 matches, and at the end we'll have an elimination round. It'll be streamed on Twitch. Your robot doesn't have to be that great. A lot of teams just have just their drivetrain from the previous year. That works really well for robot in 2 weeks. If your robot can move, great. There's a lot you can do with just pushing stuff around, especially in the first 2 weeks. So if you want to sign up, you can contact us. Our information will be at the end of this slide, also in the beginning if you want to rewatch this presentation. So yeah, you can contact us with any questions or sign up.
So if anybody has any questions, now you can ask them. I believe you can just ask them directly into the Twitch chat, and then we can get those, answer them for you. So we have a question. Someone asks, do you have different types of Mecanum wheels on the same robot? Do you recommend these wheels for rookie teams? So our team hasn't had the same types of Mecanum wheels on the same robot, though we used to use a one type and then switch to the GoBildas, but we haven't used the different types on the same robot. The wheels we recommend for rookie teams, the Vex ones aren't bad if your robot's really light and you have access to a 3D printer for the adapter, because they're cheap, though the GoBilda ones are pretty cheap for how sturdy and smooth they are. So we would recommend those if they fit your budget. They're just really nice in general. So, yeah.
So I'm just going to add on to that. Depending on the skill level of your team, you might want to stick with just 4-wheel or 6-wheel drive. There's advantages to that too. You have more traction. But if you want to take the step to learn more about these wheels and actually use them, it's a great way to do that. Might be kind of hard for rookie teams. We didn't do those our first year. Actually, for a few years, we didn't have Mecanum wheels. So yeah, if you use them, that's great. It can be hard to figure some of the stuff out though. Another question was what types of encoders you're using. I'm going to assume this is for the odometry wheels, right? Because we actually don't use encoders on our motors. We're using the rev encoders. I don't know the exact part name, but it's a rev encoder with a 1/2-inch hex in the middle for your shaft to go through. And that can be used pretty easily with just some 3D printed converters to shrink it down to your size shaft for your wheels.
So another question from Elkin Lord. What has been the coolest thing that you have done with Mecanum wheels? I'm not sure what coolest thing is exactly. This last year was really nice with the wheels, with putting stones on the foundation, because we could strafe to line up, so that was pretty cool. one of the coolest driving things is Matt on the teaser video actually drove diagonal while spinning, and that was pretty impressive. That was cool. But
Something I'll probably never be able to do again without more complicated programming, which we don't have currently.
yeah. But within a game, I think Skystone was some of the coolest ways we've used Mecanum.
Okay, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but there's another question. You recommended them for all rookie teams, or should they just do a 4- or 6-wheel drive? So there's advantages to both. 4- and 6-wheel are definitely easier. We didn't switch over to Mecanum wheels until actually just a few years ago. So I think, was that 2 or 3 years that we didn't have Mecanum wheels? So if you're ready to take that next step to jump into more programming and a little more complications in the mechanical design, then Mecanum wheels can definitely help. It also would depend on what the challenge is for each season. So.
So how can you accurately strafe to line up something like for stacking? And so for this, in your programming software, you can program in a slow button. So then when you're holding that button on your controller, like I think ours is A or B or something, you can actually hold that down and then your robot will move slower and it'll just reduce power in programming. That's really useful for lining up so you don't overshoot. So that is the main way you can line that up. Also drive practice. A lot of drive practice is really helpful for lining up and controlling the robot.
Okay, so how would you dye your Mecanum wheels? The way we did it, I don't know the exact kind of, like the brand and everything of the dye that we used. We have that recorded in our notebook. If you want to know, you can send us an email and we can check on that. But basically the way we did it is we mixed the dye with some water. We actually tried it with rubbing alcohol too, and that didn't make it work. That didn't work as well. So we mixed it with some water instead. That seemed to work better. And we put it in, we have like a mini crock pot. So we just kind of slow cooked the wheels. I think we did it overnight. And that seemed to work. The dye is RIT dye, so R-I-T. Other dyes we tried didn't seem to hold as well. One of the things you want to be careful though is to make sure when you have your rollers in the crock pot, you don't want to let it get too hot because then your rollers will actually start to crack. We had that happen to a couple of those. Thankfully I think we had extras. We had enough to fill out our wheels. So you want to make sure your crock pot's on low and then check it every once in a while just to make sure it's not getting too hot.
Thank you, Cat in the Hat. That was a fantastic presentation. Coming